is social engineering? Social engineering actually is the art of hacking mind, which means getting people to do something that you want them to do. As I mentioned before, 3% of all of security threats and attacks that exist in the internet are related to malwares, but the rest 97% is related to social engineering, which means attacker, you actually go after your children and use tricks that make your son or your daughter breaks the security rule and do something that he shouldn't. And as a result of which, the family, the community, and the country might be harmed. So, we talk about a lot of security threats that are out there, and each of them are very, very serious and important that can compromise our children. So what should we do? How to protect our children? How to approach this problem? I conducted a study a couple of years ago regarding how parents try to protect their children against different types of security attacks and hacks. The result was very interesting. I categorized the answers in 4 different strategies. Actually, there were 4 different strategies to approach this problem by different parents. A small group of parents live in no internet. Just get everything away, and then if there is no Wi-Fi, there is no risk. Well, that's true, but kids need to use technology for learning and progression. And if your son or your daughter feels that they are behind their classmates, their friends, in using technology, it would cause to social isolation, which is another big problem. Another group of parents were answered that we try to give limited privileges and limited access time to our children. For example, we use parental control software to define which apps they have access. We can turn off access to Facebook, we can turn off access to the YouTube, and this way we control them. Well, that is a good strategy. It can filter part of cyber threats that I already discussed, but of course not all of them. As I mentioned, malwares are just account 3% of whole security attacks. What about the other 97%? You cannot filter cyberbullying using an anti-spam, an antivirus. The third category told that, okay, we just frequently check the online bodies of our children. We check the friend list in social media, check their email, and check their accounts in the online video games. And this way, if we face with some strangers, we kick them out. Well, it is good in some cases, again, to avoid some sorts of security threats, but again, not all of them. It's not enough. And finally, the strategy that we believe works best is education. Just be proactive. Just try to stay ahead of growing danger of cyber criminals by taking the time to invest in something that really works, like education. When you make your children aware of different attack scenarios on the internet, when you teach them how to defend themselves against the existing type of attacks, then you will be able to minimize the risk. Of course, cybersecurity education is relevant to everybody, not just children. And the role of parents here is very important. They should be knowledgeable as well. But since kids are the people who are the most vulnerable elements in the security chain and are in the exposure of those attacks directly, if they know how to defend themselves, it would work very well. It would be very effective. So our solution actually is that we offered a comprehensive cybersecurity program in the partnership with Vancouver School Board and Kids Shield Company. Actually, we offer 6 different shield programs against 6 different cyber threats that I mentioned. And we cover grade 1 to 12 in 3 different levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And as I mentioned, as a complementary package, we will provide a parental guide for parents along each program. But I want to mention one important point here. Some of you may ask, security is a very complicated topic. How you are able to teach them to the kids? Well, that's a very valid point. Your kid might not be able to understand how a ransomware attack can affect the computer, but they are very good at understanding stories and games. What we do is simplifying the very complicated concept of security to animated stories. We visualize everything for them, and then we design security games that teach them how to recognize different types of attacks and how to defend, because kids love to play games. And when the security game is designed, the rule of game, when kids try to learn the rule of games, implicitly learn what kind of defensive way would work for each type of attack, and actually how to recognize those attacks. So we are trying to provide all the defensive way protection services for your kid, and ask you, and actually I ask you, let your kid be educated, be connected, and still stay safe while surfing online. So this program will launch next January, and the first launch will cover grade 2 to 4. And all the information regarding this course will be published in the Knowledge app. And I hope to see your children there. Thank you.
Okay, so now is the question time. Yeah, feel free to ask any question.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to address what obviously is the tacit assumption of the whole presentation, and just sort of draw attention to that assumption, because everything follows from that. The assumption, which you cited the statistics, the assumption being that young children are on the internet in the first place, and to the extent to which they are. And clearly it's become a social norm that's accepted, that the genie is kind of out of the bottle, and it's broadly accepted that this is the situation. But I wonder if we could frame that assumption differently, and rather than just seeing that as an inevitable fact of life that we all have to kind of deal with and so on, couldn't we pull back and actually begin to question the whole assumption of why young children need to be on the internet in the first place? I mean, there's many historical examples of genies that were out of the bottle that the culture later adjusted for and corrected. Maybe, you could talk about smoking culture in the 1950s, or alcohol and driving and so forth. I mean, we could frame the issue as a sort of massive societal, failure. I mean, and to that point, it seems to me that your first option of no internet is actually a pretty reasonable option. I mean, and furthermore, it's perfectly compatible with the other ones. I mean, it's perfectly compatible with your education initiatives to prepare young people for the internet that's going to come into their lives. But why do we have to accept the assumption that a 9-year-old girl needs to have unfettered access to the internet? And as you said, 9 to 13-year-old girls are susceptible to predation. But the question is, why does a 9-year-old girl need to be on the internet in an unfettered manner in the first place? I mean, Like, why can't we ask that question? What solution is the internet providing to a 9-year-old that's really necessary? So that's just my question or comment would just be that, you know, we can prepare kids to learn how to drive cars without getting in behind the wheel, you know. So I feel like it's a little bit like we've got a situation, we've got a bunch of kids driving around, you know, in cars, injuring themselves and hitting people and so on, and we're talking about how they can drive safer. You know, so rather than just say, let's teach them about road safety and cars, and they don't really need to be on the, I guess what I'm saying is, it seems to me that there's an exaggeration about what the benefits are of 9, 10, 11-year-olds having unfettered access to the internet. I mean, what are they really getting out of that?
Okay. That is
As
a
opposed to
very,
the downsides, which you so eloquently
yeah,
presented.
that is a very great point. Actually, the attack scenario example that we provided was just one example to show and visualize how the danger in the internet can danger our lives. Previously, the concern about internet was about the information security, but nowadays it's more than that. It is compromising our life as well, not just our information. So I just wanted to bold it in security is really important. But back to your main point about why a 9-year-old girl or boy should be on the internet. That is a fact that the educational system encourages children to use internet. I can remember when my son was in the grade 1, Normal Point School provided RazKit app for reading for them. So the children who were not accessing the internet couldn't use it for their learning in school. It is a part of their life, and it is just a part of that, part of learning, but this is a fact that we see in